Safeguard our flank. Part 15. The battle kicks off. At 7:26 the British gunners discharged their last rounds of their preparatory barrage. Now they concentrated on producing a smoke screen, a combination of explosive shells and smoke bombs calculated to cause maximum effect. Special sections on both the 46th and 56th fronts were lighting smoke candles and firing smoke bombs from mortars. A dense cloud of smoke drifts about in no man's land. The final loosing of shells heralded the start of the attack. The men in the firing line never experienced anything like the ferocity, for they felt it through their feet. Those on the fire steps could see the trees in the wood enveloped in smoke, hurled about like twigs in an autumn gale. In the final minutes the trench mortars contributed a further last few rounds of smoke bombs to thicken the smoke, as Gommecourt disappeared in a white mist and leaping flame. It appeared like complete saturation, which could not be withstood. Could it? The men, waiting to go over the top, were lulled into a false sense of security. Their officers had told them that it was going to be literally a walkover. They were equipped for such an event, being loaded down with all that they would need to pursue the enemy. Duckboards were carried to bridge the trenches, food, water, ammunition, bombs, spare drums and belts for the machine guns, everything for a stay of 3 days before relief. The average load was 60 pounds plus their rifle. The supporting troops also had picks and spades to alter the German trenches and do the necessary repairs, while stretcher bearers and engineers brought up the rear to give succour, support and communication. They had practised often and long. Now it was time to put their practice into action. No two men had exactly the same kit to go over the top with. Some had ladders, some bombs, others spare ammunition, and others water. Company runners may have carried a basket of pigeons and signalling with their flags. The Royal Engineers, attached to the forward troops, carried spare flex and tools for repairing breaks in the telephone wire. It wasn't envisaged by the commanders that the attacking forces were to return the same day. The plan was to hold the taken German positions for a number of days until the supporting troops from the rear regularized their positions. The relevant headquarter victualling sergeants had prepared a special breakfast and passed out bread and bully beef to sustain them until the cookhouse staff could join the forward troops. On the north side, the 5th Leicesters held the British front line south of Quadrilateral Village. They had moved into their trenches on June the 4th, patrolling at night to check the Germans were not preparing to attack or put out one of their own patrols. They had been faced with days of similar bombardments, knowing that an onslaught was heralding an attack. The Germans had been warned to be on their toes as soon as the artillery stopped. The machine gun crews practiced setting up their pieces in 3 minutes flat, and they were told that they were the saviours of their positions. Lookouts were posted using their periscopes to give the alarm in time, and when the British smoke screen was laid, that was the time the alarm was given. And now was it time to put their practice into good use. The Sherwood foresters had never felt such an effect before. The ground was trembling, which they could feel in their legs, and the trench sides were trickling with streams of dislodged earth. The puddles in the trench bottoms lapped about over the duckboards. Those brave enough or stupid enough to glance over the parapet could see the wood to their front disintegrating, trees being hurled in the air and branches snapped off to be flung about. At 7:30, smoke bombs and explosive shells stopped. Section leaders shouted as the Staffords began to scramble onto the parapet. There they deformed up, port arms, and started to walk towards the enemy, down the sloping ground into no man's land. As the company sergeants lent a hand to get the men out of the trench to form up the second wave, to clear the last of the British wire, the next wave was forming up. So far, everything was going well. The men were keeping station as they made their way through the smoke into Gommecourt Wood. Now they could feel the wind getting up, blowing the smoke away, thinning it sufficiently for the Germans to see the long lines of troops coming towards them. This sparked several Germans to clamber out of their trenches without their equipment, to rush forward with their hands in the air. On the other side of the park, the London Rifle Brigade were doing the self-same thing. Long lines of men were making sure they were in position, walking quickly and quietly through the gaps in their own barbed wire, made the night before using Bangalore torpedoes. Just after 7 o'clock on the 1st of July, German observation posts on their right front, manned by the 91st Reserve Regiment, reported a smoke screen was being laid down. As the rest of the British divisions advanced, the Kensingtons on the far side of the 56 divisions held back, waiting for the London Scottish to move forward 100 yards before they too formed up to follow on. Even though the German wire had been gapped and the smoke screen laid down, German machine guns had reaped a terrible harvest. The dogged London Scottish had, by 8 o'clock, penetrated the German line. They were the first of the 56th Division to move into and past the first German trench. In spite of the terrible fire, the men went forward, trying to keep in line at a steady pace. The German wire was supposed to be cut by the artillery fire, but was in many places untouched. Trying to get over the wire, the strands caught in their equipment or became wrapped around their legs. It was discovered that the Germans had moved back to their rear trenches. Onward marched the London Scottish to take and move past the German second line, making for the other side of the maze of enemy trenches and Fable, the German third trench. The advance continued until all the German trenches on the right flank of Gommecourt were in British hands. Part of the 169th Brigade, the Queen's Westminster Rifles, followed up, moving up over the captured German trenches between the London Rifles and Queen Victoria's to start the linking up movement with the North Midland Division when they moved down from the north. As this was happening, a section of the Cheshire Pioneers were constructing strong points in the German trenches and repositioning the firing steps to face the Germans' new front line. The Westminsters had received many casualties from bypassed Germans who were emerging from their deep dugouts. As the German artillery began to realise what was happening, they started shelling no man's land and their own abandoned front line. As there were no officers available to direct the bombing to clear the German dugouts, Second Lieutenant George Arthur left his pioneer section to take over the attack. Though slightly wounded, he instilled resolution in the men about him. Forcing their way forward, the bombers got within 400 yards of the German trench, almost within reach of where they were to join up with the North Midland Division. Meanwhile, the British artillery bombardment was directed onto the German artillery to act as a counter-battery. They in turn were replying, shooting into no man's land, disrupting the supply of ammunition and bomb making the British advance difficult through lack of support. They were now short of ammunition and bombs. Fortunately for the Germans, the right sector of their fire trenches facing the 46th North Midland Division was not being shelled. This allowed the sheltering Germans to leave their deep dugouts to see what on earth was going on. The ground to their front looked towards no man's land and Fonky-Villiers, a distance of just over 400 yards. The surface was level, just gradually dipping down into no man's land, giving them a completely open vista. They could see the smoke screen being blown about, thinning in some places and clearing in others. And through these gaps the British North Midlanders could be seen coming towards them. The Germans set off their alarms in panics, and their trenches began to fill up with breathless men. Those manning the Maxim machine guns had to assemble them and arrange their ammunition to be close at hand. The orders were given for rapid fire. The order was given to the London men to attack, and the section leaders shouted to the men to form up. Long lines of men set off, making sure they were in line, dressed 5 yards between each as they walked through the gaps in their own barbed wire made the night before. The British artillery bombardment had been lifted to raise their sights onto the next aiming point. The London Division's advance was downhill into a shallow valley, then up the other side towards the village, towards the road, Nameless Farm, and finally the Quadrilateral. The attack was across open ground, enfiladed by German machine guns and artillery. All troops were told to advance at walking pace and to keep in a straight line, and not to bunch up.